The Untold Life of Donald Trump: Power, Scandals, and Secrets. From a young real estate heir to the most powerful office in the world, Donald Trump's life reads like a Hollywood script filled with billion-dollar deals, media controversies, legal battles, and a presidency that changed America forever. But before we dive into the incredible journey that took Trump from the boardrooms of Manhattan to the Oval Office and back again, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because today we're uncovering the complete story behind one of the most polarizing figures of our time. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end to discover the shocking details that most people never knew about the man who built an empire, lost it, rebuilt it, and then shocked the world by becoming the 45th President of the United States. Donald John Trump was born on June 14, 1946 in Queens, New York, the fourth of 5 children to Frederick Chris Trump and Mary Ann MacLeod Trump. And from the very beginning, his life was anything but ordinary, because his father, Fred Trump, was already a successful real estate developer who had built thousands of apartments across Brooklyn and Queens, creating a foundation that would eventually launch his son into the stratosphere of American business and politics. Growing up in the affluent Jamaica Estates neighborhood, young Donald displayed the characteristics that would define his entire life, showing an early appetite for attention, competition, and winning at all costs, traits that became evident when he was sent to the New York Military Academy at age 13 after his parents grew concerned about his aggressive behavior and poor academic performance in regular school. At the military academy, Trump thrived in the structured environment, becoming a star athlete and eventually rising to the rank of captain, experiences that he would later credit with teaching him discipline and leadership skills that proved invaluable in his business career, though critics would argue that his time there also reinforced his authoritarian tendencies and need for control that would surface throughout his life in both business and politics. After graduating from the military academy in 1964, Trump attended Fordham University in the Bronx for 2 years before transferring to the prestigious Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied economics and graduated in 1968 with a bachelor's degree, though his academic performance remained a closely guarded secret that he would later claim was exceptional while providing no evidence to support these assertions. Upon graduation, Trump immediately joined his father's real estate business, Elizabeth Trump & Son, which primarily focused on middle-class rental housing in Brooklyn and Queens. But the ambitious young Trump had much bigger plans that extended far beyond his father's modest empire into the glittering world of Manhattan real estate, luxury hotels, and eventually global branding that would make the Trump name synonymous with wealth and excess. His first major independent project came in 1974 when he secured the rights to develop the rundown Commodore Hotel near Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan, a deal that showcased his ability to navigate complex negotiations involving tax abatements, political connections, and creative financing structures that would become hallmarks of his business strategy throughout his career. The Commodore Hotel project, which was eventually transformed into the Grand Hyatt New York, marked Trump's entrance into Manhattan real estate and established him as a player in the city's competitive development scene, though it also revealed his willingness to use political connections and government incentives to maximize profits while taking on enormous amounts of debt that would create a pattern of financial risk-taking that defined his entire business career. Throughout the 1980s, Trump embarked on an ambitious expansion that saw him develop some of New York City's most iconic properties, including Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, which opened in 1983 and became both his primary residence and the headquarters of his business empire, complete with a pink marble atrium and golden escalators that perfectly embodied the excessive luxury that Trump sought to project to the world. The tower's development involved controversial tactics, including the demolition of historic Art Deco sculptures and the use of undocumented Polish workers who worked in dangerous conditions for below minimum wages, early examples of the ethical controversies that would follow Trump throughout his business career and eventually into his political life. As his real estate empire grew, Trump also ventured into other industries with mixed results. purchasing the New Jersey Generals of the United States Football League in 1983 and immediately pushing for the league to move its season to compete directly with the NFL, a strategy that ultimately led to the USFL's collapse and a Pyrrhic legal victory that awarded Trump just $3 in damages after a successful antitrust lawsuit against the NFL. His casino ventures in Atlantic City began in the mid-1980s with the Trump Castle, followed by Trump Plaza and the crown jewel Trump Taj Mahal, which he famously called the eighth wonder of the world when it opened in 1990. Though these properties were built on a foundation of junk bonds and excessive debt that would eventually lead to multiple bankruptcies and financial restructuring that cost investors hundreds of millions of dollars, while Trump himself managed to extract millions in fees and compensation. The 1990s brought both the pinnacle of Trump's success and his most dramatic financial failures, as his empire crumbled under the weight of nearly $1 billion in debt, forcing him to undergo a very public financial restructuring that saw him lose control of many of his prized assets, including his airline, his yacht, and his stake in the Plaza Hotel, which he had purchased in 1988 for $407 million in what was then the most expensive hotel acquisition in history. During this period, Trump's personal life also became tabloid fodder when his marriage to Ivana Trump, with whom he had 3 children, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, fell apart amid highly publicized allegations of his affair with actress Marla Maples, whom he would later marry in 1993 and divorce in 1999 after having 1 child together, Tiffany Trump, born in 1993. The divorce proceedings with Ivana were particularly messy and public, involving accusations of rape that Ivana later clarified as not criminal, but rather a violation in a marital sense, though the allegations would resurface decades later during Trump's political campaigns and contribute to ongoing questions about his treatment of women throughout his life. Despite his financial troubles in the early 1990s, Trump managed to reinvent himself through a combination of licensing deals, reality television, and careful brand management that transformed him from a struggling real estate developer into a global celebrity whose name became synonymous with wealth and excess, even when many of his actual business ventures were failing or underperforming. The turning point in Trump's public image came with the launch of The Apprentice on NBC in 2004, a reality television show that cast Trump as a successful businessman evaluating contestants competing for a job in his organization, with his catchphrase, "You're fired," becoming a cultural phenomenon that introduced him to millions of Americans who had no knowledge of his previous business failures and legal troubles. The show's success, which ran for 14 seasons and spawned a celebrity edition, earned Trump millions of dollars annually and rehabilitated his public image from that of a failed businessman to a successful entrepreneur and tough decision-maker, creating the foundation for his eventual political career by establishing him as a household name with a carefully crafted persona of business acumen and leadership. During this period, Trump also expanded his business model to focus heavily on licensing his name to developments around the world, allowing him to earn significant fees without taking on the financial risks associated with actual development, a strategy that proved highly profitable and led to Trump-branded properties in countries including Turkey, Panama, India, and the Philippines, though many of these projects were later investigated for potential money laundering and connections to corrupt foreign officials and organized crime figures. Trump's entry into politics began with his promotion of the racist birther conspiracy theory starting in 2011, when he repeatedly and falsely claimed that President Barack Obama was not born in the United States and therefore was not eligible to serve as president. Allegations that were thoroughly debunked but which Trump continued to promote for years, using social media platforms, particularly Twitter, to spread these false claims and build a following among Americans who harbored racist resentments against the first African-American president. His political activities during this period also included making substantial donations to candidates from both political parties, a pragmatic approach that he would later defend as necessary for conducting business in a system that where political access was often purchased through campaign contributions, though critics argued that this demonstrated his lack of genuine political convictions and willingness to support anyone who could advance his business interests. The birther conspiracy campaign served as Trump's political coming-out party and demonstrated his ability to use media attention and controversy to maintain relevance and build a political base among Americans who felt disenfranchised by traditional politicians and were attracted to his outsider status and willingness to challenge political correctness and establishment norms. When Trump announced his candidacy for president on June 16, 2015, descending the golden escalator from Trump Tower to deliver a speech that included inflammatory comments about Mexican immigrants being rapists and drug dealers, most political observers dismissed his campaign as a publicity stunt designed to boost his television ratings and business brand rather than a serious attempt to win the presidency. However, his unconventional campaign style, which relied heavily on social media, rally appearances, and provocative statements that generated massive media coverage, quickly distinguished him from the crowded field of Republican candidates and began attracting significant support from voters who felt ignored by traditional politicians and were drawn to his promises to make America great again
and drain the swamp of Washington corruption. Throughout the Republican primary campaign, Trump systematically demolished his opponents through a combination of personal attacks, media manipulation, and populist messaging that resonated with working-class Americans who felt left behind by globalization and economic changes, ultimately securing the Republican nomination despite the opposition of most party leaders and donors who viewed him as unfit for office and damaging to the party's long-term prospects. The 2016 general election campaign against Hillary Clinton was one of the most contentious and controversial in American history, featuring unprecedented levels of personal attacks, foreign interference, and revelations about both candidates that dominated news coverage and social media discussions throughout the campaign period. Trump's campaign faced numerous scandals, including the Access Hollywood tape, in which he bragged about sexually assaulting women, multiple allegations of sexual misconduct from various women, questions about his business dealings and tax returns, which he refused to release, and growing evidence of Russian interference in the election designed to help his campaign and hurt Clinton's chances of victory. Despite trailing in most polls throughout the campaign and losing the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes, Trump achieved a stunning electoral college victory by winning key swing states, including Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin by narrow margins, a result that was influenced by a combination of factors, including Russian social media manipulation, FBI Director James Comey's letter about Clinton's emails just days before the election, voter suppression efforts in key states, and the inherent advantages that the Electoral College system provides to Republican candidates. Trump's presidency, which began on January 20, 2017, was characterized by constant controversy, unprecedented norm-breaking, and policies that dramatically altered America's domestic and international standing, beginning with his inauguration crowd-size claims that set the tone for an administration that would be marked by alternative facts, conspiracy theories, and attacks on democratic institutions, including the press, the judiciary, and the intelligence community. His first major legislative achievement was the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in December 2017, which provided significant tax reductions for corporations and wealthy individuals while providing more modest benefits for middle-class families, though independent analyses showed that the benefits were heavily skewed toward the wealthy and would add significantly to the federal deficit over time, contradicting Trump's campaign promises to eliminate the national debt and provide the greatest benefits to working-class Americans. Throughout his presidency, Trump maintained an unprecedented level of activity on social media, particularly Twitter, where he regularly attacked political opponents, spread misinformation, promoted conspiracy theories, and announced major policy changes without consulting his advisors, creating a constant state of chaos and uncertainty that dominated news cycles and made it difficult for his administration to maintain focus on policy implementation and governance. The Trump presidency was also marked by an unusually high level of staff turnover, with key positions including National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and White House Chief of Staff, experiencing multiple changes as Trump cycled through advisors who either resigned in protest over his policies and behavior or were fired for disagreeing with him or failing to demonstrate sufficient personal loyalty. His approach to foreign policy broke with decades of American diplomatic tradition, as he praised authoritarian leaders including Vladimir Putin of Russia, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and Xi Jinping of China, while simultaneously alienating traditional American allies in Europe and Asia through trade disputes, military withdrawal threats, and criticism of international agreements and organizations that had formed the foundation of American global leadership since World War II. The Russia investigation, led by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, dominated much of Trump's first 2 years in office, ultimately resulting in criminal charges against 34 individuals and 3 companies, including several top Trump campaign officials, though Mueller's final report did not establish criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russian officials, while documenting numerous instances of potential obstruction of justice that Mueller declined to prosecute due to Justice Department policies prohibiting the indictment of a sitting president. Trump's presidency reached its most controversial point with his first impeachment in December 2019, following revelations that he had pressured Ukraine's president to investigate Joe Biden and his son Hunter in exchange for releasing military aid that had been approved by Congress, an abuse of power that Democrats argued represented a clear violation of his oath of office and a threat to American democracy. The impeachment proceedings revealed a pattern of behavior in which Trump used the power of his office to pressure foreign governments to provide political assistance for his re-election campaign, including withholding a White House meeting and military aid from Ukraine until its leaders agreed to announce investigations into his political rivals, actions that multiple witnesses testified were inappropriate and potentially illegal. Although Trump was acquitted by the Republican-controlled Senate, the impeachment proceedings provided extensive evidence of his willingness to abuse presidential power for personal political gain, and established precedents for future accountability measures against presidents who engage in similar behavior, while also highlighting the extreme partisan polarization that had come to define American politics during his presidency. The final year of Trump's presidency was dominated by his response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which began affecting the United States in early 2020 and ultimately killed more than 1 million Americans, making it one of the deadliest public health crises in American history and a defining test of presidential leadership that many experts believe Trump failed catastrophically. His initial response to the pandemic included downplaying its severity, contradicting public health experts, promoting unproven treatments including hydroxychloroquine and bleach injections, and refusing to implement a coordinated national response that could have saved thousands of lives and prevented much of the economic devastation that followed, instead choosing to prioritize his re-election prospects and stock market performance over public health and safety. Throughout the pandemic, Trump consistently undermined public health measures, including mask wearing and social distancing, held large campaign rallies that became superspreader events, and promoted conspiracy theories about the virus's origins and the effectiveness of vaccines, behavior that contributed to the politicization of public health measures and likely contributed to higher death rates in Republican-leaning areas where his supporters followed his lead in refusing to take basic precautions. The 2020 presidential election campaign took place against the backdrop of the pandemic, nationwide protests against police brutality following the murder of George Floyd, and deep economic uncertainty that created one of the most challenging political environments in American history, with Trump trailing in polls throughout most of the campaign as Americans expressed disapproval of his handling of multiple crises and his divisive rhetoric that many viewed as exacerbating social tensions rather than providing unifying leadership. Despite his polling deficit, Trump and his supporters expressed confidence in victory and began laying the groundwork for challenging the election results if he lost, promoting false claims about mail-in voting fraud, encouraging supporters to monitor polling places, and suggesting that any defeat would be evidence of a rigged election rather than a legitimate expression of voter preferences. When the election results showed Biden winning both the popular vote by more than 7 million votes and the Electoral College by 306 to 232, the same margin by which Trump had defeated Clinton in 2016, Trump refused to concede and instead launched an unprecedented campaign to overturn the results through legal challenges, pressure on state election officials, and ultimately the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol that represented the most serious threat to American democracy since the Civil War. The period between the election and January 6, 2021 saw Trump engage in increasingly desperate and dangerous attempts to remain in power, including pressuring state election officials to find votes that would change the results, encouraging state legislatures to override the will of their voters and appoint alternative electors, and ultimately pressuring Vice President Pence to reject the electoral votes during the congressional certification process, actions that constitutional scholars and legal experts widely viewed as seditious and potentially criminal. His efforts culminated in the January 6, 2021 rally where he told his supporters to fight like hell and march to the Capitol, leading directly to the violent attack that resulted in 5 deaths, more than 100 injuries to police officers, and the temporary suspension of the constitutional process for certifying the election results, making Trump the first president in American history to incite an attack on the peaceful transfer of power that had been a cornerstone of American democracy for more than 2 centuries. The January 6th attack led to Trump's second impeachment just 1 week before he left office, making him the only president to be impeached twice, though he was again acquitted by the Senate in a trial that took place after he had already left office, with most Republican senators arguing that the proceedings were unconstitutional rather than defending his actions on their merits. After leaving office on January 20, 2021, Trump faced an unprecedented array of legal challenges related to his business practices, election interference attempts,
handling of classified documents, and role in the January 6th attack, making him the first former president to face criminal prosecution and raising complex questions about accountability for presidential misconduct and the application of the rule of law to former chief executives. The criminal cases against him included charges in New York related to hush money payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels during the 2016 campaign, federal charges related to his retention of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago resort and obstruction of government efforts to retrieve them, federal charges related to his attempts to overturn the 2020 election results, and state charges in Georgia related to his pressure campaign on state officials to change the election results in that state, creating a complex legal landscape that interacted with his 2024 presidential campaign in unprecedented ways. Throughout these legal proceedings, Trump maintained his innocence and characterized the prosecutions as politically motivated witch hunts designed to prevent his return to power, claims that resonated with his base of supporters but were rejected by legal experts who pointed to the extensive evidence underlying each case and the independence of the prosecutors involved in bringing the charges. Despite facing multiple criminal indictments and ongoing civil litigation, Trump announced his candidacy for president in 2024 and quickly became the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, demonstrating the continued loyalty of his base and the inability of other Republican candidates to effectively challenge his hold on the party, even as polls showed that many Americans had concerns about his fitness for office and his role in the events of January 6, 2021. His 2024 campaign has been marked by increasingly authoritarian rhetoric, including promises to use the Justice Department to prosecute his political enemies, deploy the military against domestic protesters, and implement mass deportations of undocumented immigrants, proposals that have alarmed democracy experts and civil rights organizations who warned that a second Trump presidency could represent an existential threat to American constitutional government and the rule of law. The campaign has also featured continued promotion of election fraud conspiracy theories, attacks on the legitimacy of the judicial system, and efforts to install election deniers in key positions that would oversee future elections, creating concerns that Trump and his allies are laying the groundwork for more sophisticated attempts to overturn unfavorable election results in the future. Throughout his entire career, from his early days in real estate through his presidency and beyond, Donald Trump has remained one of the most controversial and polarizing figures in American public life, inspiring fierce loyalty among supporters who view him as a successful outsider fighting against corrupt establishment forces, while generating intense opposition from critics who see him as a dangerous authoritarian who poses a fundamental threat to democratic values and institutions. His impact on American politics, media, and culture has been profound and lasting, changing the way political campaigns are conducted, the role of social media in public discourse, and the expectations that Americans have for presidential behavior and rhetoric, effects that will likely continue to influence American society for decades to come, regardless of whether he wins or loses future elections. The story of Donald Trump's life reveals the complex interplay between wealth, celebrity, media manipulation, and political power in modern America, while raising fundamental questions about accountability, democracy, and the rule of law that will continue to shape American political discourse long after he leaves the public stage, making his biography not just the story of one man's rise to power, but a window into the broader challenges facing American democracy in the 21st century and the ongoing struggle to maintain democratic institutions in an era of increasing polarization, misinformation, and authoritarian threats, both foreign and domestic.